Well, welcome to this discussion. There was a little bit of talk about what you have to say or can say about youth and all sorts of programs. We'll get there. But it's very nice to have you both, Tencho and Wangpo. I'm not sure whether everyone in the room knows who you are, so maybe you can first introduce yourself very briefly, and then we'll get going. Tencho.
Thank you, Ardie. Hello, everyone. Speaking after Richard Gere is always difficult, but it's really a pleasure to join you all here. My name is Tencho Gyatso. I serve as president of International Campaign for Tibet since 2 years, but I've been working here at ICT for since 2008. It was during the midst of the 2008 uprisings in Tibet. Those of you who remember, there were widespread uprisings across the Tibetan plateau.
Around the Olympics, right?
Yes, right after the Olympic Games. And during that time, I had just moved to Washington, D.C., and so I was volunteering and helping and running around and doing protest things. And it was at that time that John Ackley recruited me. I started part-time, and I've been working there. And now I serve as president of International Campaign for Tibet.
Thank you. Wangpo.
I am since 3 years here in the Netherlands and trying to adjust myself to the situation here. I love this country. I think the people are super open and friendly. I'm surprised to hear that the Dutch see themselves a little bit different. Yeah, but I come from Switzerland, you see. So if I compare Switzerland to the Netherlands, there's definitely a difference. I was brought up in Switzerland. I was born in Switzerland. My father was the first Tibetan to settle down as a refugee here in Europe. This was in 1960. And I was born in 1963 in Switzerland. Just a normal life as a Swiss boy. And then at some point, I, of course, got interested in Tibetan activities. So lots of volunteer work, youth activism, university groups for Tibet, and so forth and so on. And then at some point, I just went into working for NGOs such as Greenpeace, Green Party Switzerland. Then later on, I had a small company of my own. Then I worked for Swiss Aid, and then I worked for some other organization, and so forth and so on. And then 3 years ago, my wife saw this this advertisement by ICT and said, maybe that's something for you, yeah? Now she regrets showing me this because she's in Switzerland. I'm here. Yeah.
She wanted to get rid of you.
A very good suggestion.
Take that energy somewhere else.
But you've been very everywhere, very very present in Europe since day one. I think of your tenure, because I think I've known you for the last 2-3 years, and your name pops up everywhere all the time. As does your name in the global and US context. So what we're going to do now is the session is focusing on Tibet and the world of tomorrow. So it's good to also try to look in at the future. But what I'd like to do is first look at the now, the present. Then I think it is interesting to go back in time a little bit and talk a bit about that. And then we'll get to the future, so all of you sort of know what the proceedings are. Now, the now is a very volatile period, I think, all over the world. If you look at the geopolitical context, if you look at uncertainty. But I don't want to go into geopolitics at this time. I would like to hear from both of you what the situation inside Tibet is right now. Because it's very difficult to get information out, right? So I'd like to hear from you what's happening in Tibet? Do we know what's happening in Tibet?
Thank you, Ardie. And today, between these last few days, we've been talking a lot about that also here. And well, one of the questions is what is happening in Tibet today? And it's partly, it goes to show how difficult access to Tibet is. Just last week, Freedom House released their report where Tibet is at a freedom scale of 0, the least in the whole world. So that goes to show. And inside Tibet, I mean, I was just saying when I started working at ICT, soon after that, we had the whole spectrum of self-immolations in Tibet. And during those times, it was so difficult to work on this issue. We were getting information from Tibet where it was so horrendous of people self-immolating. We would wake up not wanting to turn your phone on because you didn't know what you would see. But and then today we have where there's really almost nothing trickling out, where it's so close. So it's like, but there are over 80% of children in boarding
schools. That's
the security and the security and people are monitored at a higher level than ever before. If any movement is monitored, the whole Tibetan plateau is militarized at a strategic and higher level. Then the Chinese have become really sophisticated in, as Richard was earlier saying, in the language they use, in the equipment they use, in how they control Tibet at very many layers. So in some sense, it is a really heightened security space there inside Tibet. And as a monitoring organization, there was the earthquake that happened in Tibet in January, and there was a real sense of, for us, the earthquake happened and came out in the news, and so many people reaching out, asking what's happening, how can we help, what can we do, but we have no news on the ground. We have only what the Chinese authorities share.
Yeah, so there were a couple of pictures. I mean,
Yes.
there was footage, but of the heroic rescue efforts of the People's Liberation Army, of course.
But
so
inside,
how do you get any information out of
we
Tibet?
get spots of information because people stay in touch, but they don't talk about the political situation. We have little bit information, and what we have is we have researchers who pay attention to all the little pieces of news they come out, and they help us put it together into what policymakers and governments understand. So as an organization, I think this is part of what we do, is we advocate for Tibet, but also we look at the information that comes out and how to share that so that policymakers understand the situation when there's so little access. Maria Ongbla, you can add to that.
Yes, and as Angela said, the situation and the news that come out from Tibet are mostly disheartening and very difficult. But then again, there are also some positive, news and developments in Tibet. And if I would ask you what was sort of the most important thing that, or what would you consider as the most important piece of news that get out of Tibet in the last 3 years, what would it be? I see lots of.
Anybody? Yeah,
one
back
person
there.
Maybe.
Amy.
Yeah, Amy.
I would say in addition to everything else and so little information coming out, it's that we finally have proof of the colonial boarding school system in Tibet and how many children are actually being put in this.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say something differently. Yeah, I think it's very important what you said. I would say there was a gathering in Tibet maybe 2 years ago, a Kala Chakra organized by the Kongdan Rinpoche. He's a Lama from Amdo region. And it initially started with maybe 5,000, 10,000 was maybe the idea. At some point, over 200,000, 300,000. In the end, a group of 500,000 people gathered. Some even say it could be 1 million. It's a whole valley with tens of people coming there and celebrating this event. Of course, it's a religious event, but it was also an expression of Tibetan identity, of Tibetan culture, of Tibetan sort of, we are here, sort of, you see, we are present, we are existing. And it came out of nowhere, and it was the largest gathering of people in the whole of China in the last 10 years. And it happened somewhere in the mountains of Tibet. So people are aware, people do something, and though this system is super repressive, there are small cracks sometimes, you see, and then unbelievable things happen, yeah.
Now, if you look at the media and what kind of stories come out of Tibet, I remember talking to you at some point. You said, when was the last time you heard a story about Tibet? This was before the boarding schools. That was sort of a big story. And your own answer then was 2008. We haven't heard very much new information coming from Tibet and being written about, talked about in mainstream media since 2008. That has to do, just with Richard, we talked about information suppression, and so how would you describe the Chinese way of, how effective is the Chinese way of suppressing information, any information about Tibet or coming from Tibet?
Shall I?
Yeah, first.
Yeah, China is very effective because all these digital sort of technologies can be controlled. Initially, it was thought internet would sort of give us free access to information. What we now see is it actually sort of helps you to control the people, yeah. And this happens in Tibet, and you all know what is happening in Tibet, in China, with I think there is a growing awareness also here in Europe that these technologies are not only for the benefit of people's information, but it's also about tracing the people and to understand who is releasing what kind of information. And this happens, and this is also the I think one of the most effective weapons for this rule in for the Communist Party in China, to scare people and also stop them from sharing information to other parts.
So self-censorship is very
Self-censorship plays a big role, and then sort of a very harsh punishment for some people who sort of dare to do this, you see, and this is then shown in the societies, and people, of course, get frightened about this. Yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
Yes, so how to get Tibet on the news. So one of the things that we're doing is we're focusing on His Holiness's 90th birthday.
Yeah.
And we're using a year of compassion is what the Tibetan leadership in Dharamsala have proposed. And in view of that, we are starting a Compassion Rising World Tour of 2025. We're taking His Holiness's message and His Holiness's teachings, that is the core of what Tibetan culture and brings, to the world through music, through art, through his films, through his books, so that we can invite partners, individuals, institutions, organizations, schools, everyone to join in and do events celebrating his message, because I think his message is more relevant today than ever before. For young people, for all of us. As you said, there's so much going on in the world. And in that, how do you deal with it? How do you learn? I mean, you know, His Holiness talks about his own life, how he lost his freedom when he was enthroned as head of a nation when he was just 15, and he had to deal with China coming into Tibet and working at that level, and then escaping when he was 24 with barely the clothes on his back to start a life as a refugee, and then build up from there. So I think sharing that message and how, you know, how the lessons from him in this time will be a way also to share Tibetan knowledge with people around the world.
Yeah, so this is Tibetan knowledge. It's the message of the Dalai Lama. What strikes me in these past few days is there's a lot of culture as well, which sort of enforces the message. So it's good to combine all of that. Now, the Chinese party state, of course, tries to has made a huge effort to destroy the Tibetan culture. How do you keep that alive as diaspora communities? But maybe also how do people within Tibet keep that alive? Do you have any idea about that?
Very difficult question because I think it's always difficult to generalize. You see, it's sort of there are different sort of situations. Also, the generations handle this question differently. The elder, the younger. So it's very difficult to generalize. But what I sort of see, and also what His Holiness was able to do was, despite all the misery, despite all the difficulties that he had to face, when he came in the early 70s, 90s to 80s to Europe, actually he had a different message. Yeah. He talked about the potential that people have for change. Yeah, that you can do something. So he was not a victimized person, but he said, I can offer something out of my culture. And I think this sense of pride about one's own culture, this sort of confidence about where you are rooted in, is very much in the Tibetans. It could be in some songs, it could be in some poetry, it could be in the way we live our lives, it could be in the nomads' pride about their herds, it could be, you see, all these many things. So honestly, I hear a lot about these efforts by China and all the horrible things. I read a lot, but when I look at the Tibetans, you see, and see how self-confident they are about what they are, you see, I'm quite hopeful that things won't turn like you see, black or something like this. There's lots of hope. Yeah.
Yeah, looking back at the past, I was at the Rotterdam Film Festival recently, and there was a film made by a Tibetan producer and director, and it was called, I think, Four Rivers, Six Ranges, in English, which was a bit special. But what struck me, because he was there and the whole cast was there as well, with a lot all first-time actors and very powerful and very aware and with a very strong sense of identity. His message was just looking back at the past. It's a film about the armed resistance in 1958-59. And he said, I think it's really important that this armed resistance message or story is being told as well, because everyone sees Tibet and Tibetans as peaceful, sometimes as victims. But it's very, very important to not just talk about suffering, but to talk about assertiveness. How does that message what do you think of his message and of his need to tell that story?
Yes. No. The invasion and occupation of Tibet was a brutal one. It was not a peaceful liberation at all. And in fact, right from the 49, the battle as the communist army came in, there were battles all along the way, and Tibetans were fighting all the way along. And the battles are also from generation to generation, because there have been battles. Tibetans go back. We are Buddhists, but our roots we are a warrior tribe roots. So I mean, this was part of that. But as you said, the film that you mentioned portrays the guerrilla fighters from the late 50s, 59, 58, 59, 60s who were working there, and they called themselves the Tanglam Masung volunteers, volunteer protectors of the Dharma. And then later they were called Chushikangtu, but they really fought and armed resistance. In fact, in the later periods, there were also CIA funding to recruit some of the warrior fighters and gives them training, and they were parachuted into Tibet, and many of them really died tragically trying to gain freedom for Tibet.
And we had, on the first day of the Tibet Days, we had Jamia Nobu here talking about these stories. And there were women who led this fight. There were sort of men, young people, and it was a very sort of determined sort of resistance against this invasion, yeah. And sometimes, of course, in the West, there's this perception of Tibetans being super peaceful, only religious, only Buddhist. But there are also these other elements in our culture. And I think this is something that we have to acknowledge. And I think which makes also our sort of quest to live a peaceful life even more, you see, important, yeah. Saying this, I think when it comes to sort of perception in the West about Tibet and media expectation, sometimes there's I feel if we talk to media people and their intentions automatically sort of goes to some sort of the hardship and all these things.
Negative stories.
Yeah, it doesn't go to the potential and the strengths that these people have. I think this is true for us Tibetans. This is true for the Yugur people who sort of are not only victims, they have a lot to present to the world and to the region, yeah. Same as us, yeah, or the Mongolians, yeah. So I think these sort of prejudices or stereotypes are sometimes not really beneficial to have a realistic view of the people, yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to also talk about other aspects, definitely. Now, 66 years since the armed uprising, so commemorating, celebrating, as Richard Gere just said as well. So it's not just a commemoration, but also a celebration of strength, I would say. Where are we now, according to you? So there was a protest march yesterday. There were speeches, talk to politicians. How do you evaluate the current? Where do we stand?
Yeah, so the current situation, where do we stand? I feel like, so I'm looking over here at the audience also, and I see here Loten La, and there Lobsan Tsutum La, and Ongbula also. You were on another continent, but we all grew up around the same time. We grew up as the first generation who was born outside Tibet in exile. We've never seen our homeland. But deeply rooted in our culture and in carrying this movement forward. And we all do it in our own ways. And then I think it goes also to see all these younger Tibetans here who are also involved, and I see children over here, others, and we see the larger friends who are here. So I think the Dalai Lama, in leaving Tibet and not being captured by Chinese authorities in '59, leaving, really built a huge movement of support for Tibetan, and this struggle has been able to have a stage in the world. And today now is where this is going to go. So I think we are in a crucial period where, and decisions and efforts that we are able to do in this time will shape the future. So I think we have to give the best we can. We have to be focused. We have to be strategic. And when we, from the future, when we look back at this time, we should be able to say, yeah, we tried our best then, and not go back, to a time when it's not the time to be relaxed now. It's the time to really
To be vigilant, to be active.
vigilant, to be active, and to create the space for yourself, because it's not going to automatically come.
No.
So we have to learn how to do that. And I
Jeff-
think, yeah.
Wangpo.
Yes, and if you ask where are we today, if I look at the Netherlands and the political situation here, just few weeks ago we had a debate in the parliament on China, and for the first time there was sort of a strong mentioning about the situation of the Uyghur people. Even Southern Mongolia was mentioned. Taiwan was very strong in this debate, and Tibet was mentioned, very strongly. So I think one would not expect this if you look at the news situation. There was not too much news around Tibet in past months. Also not about the Southern Mongolians or the Uyghur people. But I think there's a growing awareness about the situation in China, here in the Netherlands, that we need to look much sort of more detailed into the situation, and they see also a potential of people like us or the Uyghur people to be a positive force in this region. I think that's one part of how the perspective on China changed. And this gives us space to operate and do something, which is positive, and it's about grasping this opportunity.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I might add to that, in the United States, we've had quite a bit of success in the last couple of years working on legislation, strategically legislation, looking at the space that there is for what language can be used. And in 2018, we were able to look at how American government was operating then on the language of reciprocity and put laws like reciprocal access to Tibet that looks at access to Tibet for access to United States for Chinese citizens are unfettered, but United States access to Tibet there isn't any
Zero.
access. So that law looks at that and says State Department needs to monitor. Does United States diplomats have access? Journalists have access? American citizens, do they have access? Do Tibetan Americans have access? So I think that kind of legislation. And last year, we were able to pass a legislation called Resolve Tibet Act, that is now United States law, that says that there is a dispute between China and Tibet, that the Chinese claim that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity is inaccurate. So having things like that, being able
Pushing
to find
back.
the
Yeah.
space to push back and have some space for this, I think these are things that we can do more of. And that's what we've been also talking in these last days. How do we find the space to do more in Europe and other places? So we have our colleagues who have been working on that over here as well.
Yeah, what strikes me in the Netherlands is that, as Wangpo was mentioning, there's quite a bit of cooperation between the Tibet community, the Uyghur community, Hong Kongers that are coming in recently as well. And I was at a meeting recently where people shared their story, and where there were also Han Chinese activists, feminists, gay rights activists, etc. And what I saw happening at the meeting, and Wangpo was there as well, was that where the non-Han groups are so used to seeing any Han Chinese as well, with a lot of suspicion. But what you could see, and it was even mentioned by a couple, is that, well, we seem to be doing the same thing and fighting for the same cause, and we should join hands. And what I see happening in the Netherlands, at least, is, and I see that in these meetings as well, is the other day people from the Uyghur movement, people from the Hong Kong movement, and Han activists all joining hands, and that to me seems like a very positive thing, because otherwise it's all these different groups fighting their own fight. Is that happening in the US as well?
Yes, to some extent, very much so. And I think countering China will take everyone together. And looking at one of the other things we need to do is also look at what the future is going to be, a positive future for China. What does that look like? You know, it is the Tibetans who have a vision, but what is the vision of the others? And to look at that, because when we look at China, you see this powerful authority who have these relationships across the world and who's gaining power, but actually very few people know what is actually happening in China. It's there is growing dissatisfaction and in even Xi Jinping's authority is, many people question that and where it's going to go. So I think the information we say, little coming out of Tibet, even the information coming out of China is not enough for us to understand fully where it's going. So I think tackling something like that, the more we can do things together, better.
Yes, and Ardie, I'm very happy that you mentioned this this subject, because we had on, when was it? Saturday evening, we had here 2 panels, and with people who are even, you see, not Hong Kong or Taiwanese, even from other, you see, groups who resist and try to bring some positive change in their society, communities, and so on. And I have to say, for example, here in the Netherlands, there is this group of, we call it Solidarity Network, yeah, and Chinese gay rights activists, other activists, social activists, the Hong Kongers. We came together. The reason why we came together was actually transnational repression. But what holds us together is not transnational repression, but the values that we share, the values that the way we think about freedom not only about being in opposition to something, but to create something, to create human relationships which are of value, create communities that work, you see, culturally together, work to create an environment where people are happy and are able to express themselves in whatever way they want to express themselves. So, yes, difficulties, problems, the CCP brings us together, but what holds us together is not the troubles, is the problems. It's the positive values. Yeah.
And in that, if I might add also, I see that a lot amongst the younger
So the
members.
young generation is very important
I
there.
see them working together more, working closely, working in creative ways, tying the communities together. So that's a positive way, I think, for them.
Yeah. Now, these are, as we mentioned, quite troubling and turbulent times, is what a lot of people call them. But also concerning the Dalai Lama and his 90th birthday. I mean, so there is going to be a time when he's not here anymore. How do you see that as a future? Because I looked at some statements from himself from 2011 about what happens when I'm not there anymore, and how about reincarnation. very many different options. Just looking at his own statements there, how could you elaborate a little bit on that? On how does he himself see his own reincarnation with the big risk, of course, that the Chinese authorities are going to point somebody out and say, well, this is the new guy, and that will be then something someone Beijing can control. How does it work at this time? How does he see it?
So let me preface by saying, in the Tibetan tradition, when we have our Lama with us, we don't talk so much about when his passing. That's not appropriate. But at the same time, when we talk about His Holiness, he is the 14th Dalai Lama. Mm-hmm. We've had 13 before him. So this is not something that, for Tibetans, it's part of Tibetan Buddhist culture and way of Tibetan Buddhism. So this is something uniquely Tibetan that we've dealt with for many incarnations, and it will be. And in His Holiness has been very clear, and he has, in 2011, very clearly stated that if there is to be a reincarnation, then it will be up to the Tibetan Buddhist communities to decide if there should be one. And if there is one, then it's very clear. It's to serve the purpose and the work of this Dalai Lama. So it will be his decision alone, and not by any outside party. And so I think that statement...
He prepared the way.
He's prepared the way in that. And then in how, as an advocacy organization, how we've been working on this is, again, through legislation, looking at legislation that says that in the United States, the legislation says that succession is the succession should be responsibility of that particular people of that faith. So it would be the Tibetan Buddhists who will deal with that, and if there is government interference, then there will be sanctions on those authorities who are making those interferences. So in Europe, here also in the Netherlands, there are similar statements, yes.
So there's a bit of a shield provided. What struck me because 2011 is about 15 years ago. So he was about 75, and he in the same statement he said something about around the time when I'm 90, then all the religious leaders will get together and will discuss this. Is that actually something on the table at this time, or? Because it was sort of safely 15 years in the future. Now we're there. Is there any discussion about that?
So that is in the discussion, and I have seen also that the latest articles on His Holiness's book, there was written also there is going to be birthday celebrations for His Holiness in July, and around that time there is also a religious leaders gathering. Whether there will be a statement after that, I don't know. It'll be up to His Holiness, but there are these meetings and there are these efforts from the Tibetan Buddhist community.
Now, there is the religious part and there's the political part, of course. Richard Gere said something about, modernization is ongoing at this time, but it's also necessary. He talked about monasteries, and so he talked about the religious side. I would like to hear a little bit more both on the religious side and the political side. What kind of steps are being taken to modernize? Because to be as effective as you can, it is imperative, of course, to go with the times.
I think I go back to where I was saying, pointing to my classmates over here and saying we're all working in these different. So I think this Holiness, His Holiness and his generation have created an army of Tibetans who are working to try and do that for our brothers and sisters inside Tibet. So in terms of language, it's amazing what the group of monks and Tibetan scholars have been doing in exile, because Tibetan can be used on your phones and electronically everywhere. There's Tibetan AI, all of these, so that it's at a level. And I was talking to Geshe Mölam, who is the young monk who is behind all of these, and he was saying, as our language is being threatened inside Tibet, we outside have to build it up so that at a point when it's needed, that we're there to give all of this.
So you can protect it.
So you can protect it. And then in terms of religious teachings, I think His Holiness 20 years ago, he's been teaching, not just in the monasteries, but teaching young kids. Just last night I was, scrolling through as I was a little bit of jet lag. I woke up and I came across this video people were sharing of His Holiness speaking to young children at the Tibetan Children's Village School in Dharamsala, where he makes an effort every year to go to the school, to sit with the children like this and give them the teachings that he normally gives to big monasteries and things, but talking with them. And he was telling them, you are born as Buddhists, and then he was saying, you can have, there are fruits you have, if you have an apple, you might have a raw apple, you have a half-ripe apple, and you have a fully ripe apple. So, you're like the raw apple just
now.
born. Your parents
develop.
are Buddhists and you think you're Buddhist, so that's where you are. But the goal is that you try and reach there and you have the tools you need. So I think he had instilled in that that we teach Buddhism not just in the monasteries but as practice and for ordinary people. So I think Buddhist monastery, people going to monasteries and living that kind of life is decreasing, but at the same time, lay people studying Buddhism is increasing.
So it's a different balance, but it's still there. Could you elaborate maybe a bit on the political side, because that also is important in today's world?
On the political side of what?
Modernization.
Obviously, the people have changed now. As Tencho said, there is a new generation of people who are educated in the West, and I think it's natural that, for example, I or the younger Tibetans who are here, and we are so much influenced by the interactions that we have here in the West with people like you, with our supporters, with friends, with our so that we, of course, are not compatible to ourselves maybe 40, 50 years ago. So the same things also in Tibet happened, I think. There are people who are sort of have more knowledge about the world and so on. So the attitude, I think, of Tibetans towards many of the current situation is not comparable to what 50 or 100 years ago were there. That's one point. So very easy and basic fact, you see, to understand, but which is very important. Then when it comes to sort of the organizational part, you see, we have a Tibetan administration in exile. It's called the Central Tibetan Administration. It's also, we have a Tibetan parliament, there are elections, we have people who are organizing smart vote tools before the elections, so that the people not just vote along the regional alliances, but sort of try to go into the topics. So all these things are also happening. Is it sufficient? Of course not. There's a long way to go until the people sort of become more enlightened, more sort of educated about all these difficult issues. But I think we are on the right track.
If I might add,
Yes,
because
of
I was
course.
just reminded of
Yeah.
what Richard said earlier, of bringing the next generation on. So I think that is part of, from myself in my position at ICT, I think for our organization also, what the future work we do, it has to be defined now. So I think it's really important for us and the older generation to pass on the history to the younger generation. And, you know, there are now so many younger Tibetans who are sharing their story and looking at the history through film, through writings, through, you know, art, through different creative mediums. But then from there will become what will be, I mean, I think the future going forward will even be more different from where it is now, but still has to have that rooted and that connection to the culture and where we come from.
Yes, especially film is something which is quite close also and dear to me. And I started maybe 10, 12 years ago, a film festival, the Tibet Film Festival in Zurich. And when we first started, it was because of Tundu Wangchen, who got imprisoned, sentenced for 6 years of producing a small film, a documentary, which was called Leaving Fear Behind. And then we said we need to do something to sort of to remind the people that he's in prison. So let's do a film festival, and we started this in a very small and shabby place in Zurich. Meanwhile, through this film festival, we came to know that there are many producers in Tibet who are doing wonderful films, and these Tibetans also inside Tibet came to know that we are doing this film festival. So there was suddenly sort of unexpected, you see, communication between film lovers, you see. And this is interesting, you see. If you do something, something happens, you see. And I think this also shows how modernization sort of comes from this cultural field, you see. It's not only politics that determine our life.
Yeah, so creativity, arts are very important, and if you use those, then things happen that you probably didn't expect by just organizing that. I'd like to open up to the floor in a little bit, but I'd like to ask both of you one question about how you see the future. Because well, we have these uncertain times. We have we've discussed the resilience of the Tibetan movement, and so how do you see the where do you think we are in say 10 years time? And it can be personal, not necessarily really big and political, religious.
You go first.
And this is the most difficult question. So some months ago, we did a sort of a big workshop, which was called Future of Tibet, and there was a series of meetings that we did. We started first in DC, then in Paris, then Switzerland, and finally we went to India. And we tried to develop some scenarios. You see, there was something which was sort of something goes totally wrong. Then there was something which was sort of more hopeful, and then something which was more hanging in there, or sort of people who don't, or us not sort of able to understand that there's an opportunity to grasp, And in this discussion about the 4 scenarios, I noticed that everyone wanted to discuss only this positive, you see. And it's good, you see. It shows that the people sort of go after this positive
vision,
thing, this vision, So it's vision driven, and I think those people who are able to talk about the future in a positive manner are also able to shape it. And I feel there's this strong sense among us, not only Tibetan, also among our friends, you see, that something positive can happen, and this is what pushes us,
And you had some time to think.
No, the future is complicated. So as Ongpula was saying, it can go in so many directions. But what gives me what I think is there is a lot of space and opportunity right now for us to shape what that future is going to be. And this is what I was saying earlier, is to find the time to, it's actually for myself, and most of my time is spent reacting, because, oh, this happens and we have to do this, this happens, we have to do this, or we have to do, there's so many things to do that it's a luxury to look at the future and prepare ahead. But it's time that we have to create that space to have what is that scenario is going to look like and how we deal with it. And, you know, so I think we really have to put some effort into doing that and move beyond the, you know,
The here and now and the daily pressure. Yeah, I like your example of sitting down and looking at different scenarios, because with the idea that you can shape the future if you have a clear view. So that definitely is a way to go, and would be a good suggestion for different groups in different places to do that kind of an exercise. Are there any questions here? There's one here. Maybe let's switch microphones.
We can share one.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, Techdele, I'm Loten, and I just wanted to say that, like you two missed one very important kind of thing, especially on information control by China. Myself, as an activist and singer, I travel a lot around the world, and I just want to say that I think around, of course, before, but from 2008, after the Olympic, China put so much pressure, brought so much, especially not only the politicians, but journalists, newspapers. You know, I remember, like, really the big newspapers, if you see, like, every month I would see a huge kind of advertisement of 16, 18, 20 pages of, you know, brought by China to talk about how wonderful they're doing in Tibet and this and that. So they bought newspapers, journalists, to not to talk about Tibet by threatening them, you know, or buying them behind by money. So what I want to say is that consequently, I realize that, you know, I sometimes do a lot of these experiments. And because of that, I travel a lot. Because I travel a lot, I ask many young people. For instance, yesterday, I was like in a tram going towards the center, and then two young women around the age of 16, 17, like, they asked me who I am or where I come from. Then I said, I'm from Tibet. I said, what? Tibet? They've never heard of Tibet, you know. Like I said, are you educated? They said, yeah, we are going in ordinary, normal school here and this and that. And then I was hoping at least, you know, I said, do you know Dalai Lama? They said, no. So the thing is that this is not only here in Amsterdam, but because I travel a lot and I do these experiments, so many young people between the age of, let's say, 10 to 25, even 30, because of China's this like amazing
Controlling
or whatever,
the narrative.
evil, yeah. So many people around the world, especially young people, educated people, they know nothing about Tibet or just superficial. So this is so dangerous because China bought the journalists. Why journalists and newspapers? Because it's an outlet of information, you know. So that was one thing that because as an activist, I was very keen, kind of really doing research, and I bought all these newspapers. You know, I still have them, like from 2000, you know, or 2008. So I think this is something I just want to appeal to the world journalists, you know, newspapers. Please stay, you know, where you're supposed to be. And not
Even if there's not much information,
Yes,
it's important
exactly,
to know
because
about and report
it's
about
terrible. I mean, you know, like this is really cutting off, not by, like, okay, that's instigated by China, but free people who stand for journalists, you know, who stand for all these ideals. They are the ones who actually stopped information on Tibet in this Western world and in the free world. Well, I mean, okay, fine, but no, but that's not the argument. The point here I'm saying is that
It's
this
a campaign
is
by
very,
the
very
Chinese authorities.
dangerous campaign because young people know nothing. We think that the whole world knows about that, but unfortunately, it is the sad fact.
So can we maybe make that into a recommendation for the international campaign for Tibet to try to make what's happening in Tibet even more to tell the truth, but
talk about the truth and not being judged or being paid money and this and that.
but if young people don't even know Tibet, where Tibet is or where
That's what I'm saying. They stopped it since 2008. There was no information. Check every newspaper. Some superficial stuff about this and that. If you check really meticulously,
there is not much.
You will see it. And I can guarantee you, I have all those newspapers in my hand and I can prove that.
So what to do?
One of our efforts was through this reciprocal access to look at journalists getting access to Tibet, and we share this with the report back to journalists and ask them, journalists in China especially, to continue to ask, because many of them, what they do is, Tibet, we won't get access, so they will not go. Likewise for governments, likewise, when there's the earthquake and things, asking people and governments and others to go to Tibet. And
report
back. If you go, then you can get
yeah, so it's an ongoing struggle, but it's important to continue doing that. Thank you very much for your extra information. Any other questions? This one here.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I really appreciate how your positive message, because sometimes that is, at least for me, quite difficult to see the potential and the positivity through all the misery. But my question kind of linked in to Lotten's one. And I am a university lecturer, and I actually teach about Tibet and Tibetan language at Leiden University. And I see that too, even with educated young people, that even the word Tibet is always, the whole concept is already very difficult. And right now what is happening, and you of course are aware of this, is that it is even made more difficult, not just by journalists not reporting on this, but also because of the recent name change of Tibet Autonomous Region to Xizang Autonomous Region, and then also Chinese embassies then pushing that onto museums such as Musée Guimet. And of course that has been reported on quite well, I would say, in the media, the I would say successful protests. So that's a positive against the name change in the museum from Tibet to Xizang, and what I've heard is that they are going to change it back again, so that's definitely a win. But of course this is going to happen on many levels, that even the word Tibet is going to disappear, or at least made problematic, made complicated. And when things are complicated, people don't want to learn about it, people don't want to know about it. So what would be the strategy? Because this is going to happen in museums, but also in, I would say, geography books, maps, it's already happening. So what would be the sort of general strategy to sort of stop this from happening, or to sort of to try at least to be vigilant against this happening?
Yeah, so this is about language, right? And how the name of Tibet, in Chinese it has been Xizang all along, but now in all the English language...
This is not true.
All the English language, Xinhua press agency, etc., they now have switched 2 months ago or a bit longer.
But it has not been Xizang all along. Tibet Autonomous Region, yes, but Tibet is of course more than Tibet Autonomous Region.
I'm talking about the Chinese language. So in the
Yes, no,
Chinese
no,
language,
but
in
also
Chinese newspapers, it has been called Xizang for a long time. But
No, the
in
TAR
English,
has been called Xizang, but when you count Kamen Amdo, those have never been Xizang. So that's what I'm also trying to teach my students. It's complicated. It really is, and this makes it even more complicated.
And that
so what can you do about it is the basic
I think
question.
that goes back to China getting more sophisticated in how they are, attacking all aspects of Tibet and Tibetan identity and culture, and really trying to cut at the roots of thing. And this is something that very subtly they've been doing. Even the boarding schools. There were boarding schools from the 80s. There were boarding schools. They were slowly. It wasn't until Tibetan Action Institute, Gen Gyalo, got into the details of it, and he was somebody who was working in the system, and he came out and he was able to bring it out alive. Likewise, the Xizang, slowly they started putting it into. So this is what China does, really, in a.
It's about borders. It's about language.
Yes, in a long plan, and that's here we are a small handful. We up, and we don't have the resources. And I mean, China has.
But the example that's being given is Musée Guimet in Paris, that is has been pressured, but somehow feels that it needs to change. So this is also maybe about systematically pushing back.
Yes, and not giving up and pushing back. And I know it goes to the groups, the Tibetan communities in France there, the Students for Free Tibet, the young, all the groups there who were there, out there, not taking no for an answer and continuing to go.
So not
like
normalizing,
yes,
but
not
saying,
normalizing, just being like the mosquito. There.
being like the mosquito.
No, I think I can promise if something like this happens in the Netherlands, there will be a legal case from ICT because we won't accept this, you see, because it's not only about. So it's about disinformation, It's about sort of denying this identity of the people. What shall people think about, you see, who come from this religion and live here, if sort of their origin is sort of just cut out, you see, deleted. So I think legal steps will be taken here. And I know also in France they're preparing something. So I think we have to fight this with all our means. And there's no way of sort of looking at this and hoping that someone corrects this for us.
Hoping it goes away is not going to solve it. No.
We have to do something and push hard, very, very hard.
And also, I want to say, in Paris, Tibetans and Tibet support groups have successfully worked together with the university in Paris, INALCO. So when this happens in the Netherlands, I'll be here if I can
That's
help.
good to know. Yeah, so there's room for, maybe two more questions. I see one here, but I also see one at the back. So let's have three. Maybe you can all ask your question, and then Wangpo and Tencho can answer.
My question is for Tencho. What is your plan if you get tomorrow to Lhasa? So as I know, like Wangpo would like to make Lhasa like a cultural hub for Inner Asia. So something positive, just.
Okay, so let's have the three questions, and then the two of you answer. Later on. First, back there, and then you.
I just wanted to add one quick thing about the replacement of Tibet, right, in Xizang. Is the other thing, it actually appeared at least once in the New York Times, and I think that's a really simple action that we can all do, is when we see that, we write a letter to the editor, we call ICT, because it just slips in here and there. We don't always see it, but if every time that it is used, we are on it, like the same way with the museum, the New York Times, I think that really is a good way to push back. And also in the Netherlands, I'm from the States, but as the media is becoming less and less independent and more controlled, it's in all of our interest to continue to push back when we see things that are not correct.
Yeah, a very useful, practical suggestion of pushing back, not just waiting for others to do so, but to do so yourself. There's one here too.
Yes, I was wondering if you could say something. His Holiness often refers to the fact that the amount of Buddhists is growing within China. And he also referred to the fact that a lot of intellectuals, that disobedience, but also since Corona, many younger people in China are also kind of in resistance to the major control and especially the media control. Is there something like an alliance possible between, I don't know if it has to be ICT, but between Tibetans in exile and those in China who are, more modern thinking and really would like to have more freedom?
Okay, so maybe your question can be answered by Wangpo, and you had a personal question about what would you do if you would get to Lhasa?
Ziad, you asked the tough question. No, you asked the nice question. I think my husband and I recently did a short trip to Kyoto because we were looking for a place that took us away but not too far, and Kyoto seemed like a magical place. And we visited there, and it was really magical because you had the centuries, the old Japanese culture there. Still, it looked like time had stood still in parts of Kyoto, but it was still so modern and had everything to it. So I would love to see Lhasa like that, where Lhasa has all the beauty and charm of the centuries of Lhasa, but that there's the modern aspect where there's space for all the cultures to live comfortably together. So I think Kyoto was, in that way, it was a beautiful visit.
It's a very nice vision. So a modern, but also historic city at the same time. Thank you. Wangpo.
Yes, Babette, this is a very difficult question. I don't have enough information, you see, to support what I say now. But I feel when it comes to Buddhism, and obviously China is a Buddhist country. It used to be a Buddhist country, and many of those institutions are at the moment are not functioning in such a manner as it should be. On the other side, we know, for example, from Taiwan, there is a flourishing Buddhist community, and Buddhism sort of connects many of these areas. Taiwan, India, Vietnam, all Thailand, Burma, so Mongolia. And it's quite amazing how sort of these Buddhist countries that are sort of communities that are flourishing sort of actually built a circle around China at the moment, So I think also in China there are lots of people who want to sort of revive Buddhism in a manner which is very sort of similar, like in the old ages. On the other hand, we also know there's lots of repression and so on and going on. So I can't really foresee in the future what will happen. Saying this, there was recently a book published, The Golden Road, by William Dalrymple, a Scottish historian. And if you read his book, you see how much also India plays a role, or played a role in connecting all these areas with their culture in the past. So I think it's not only the Tibetans, you see. I think also India could play a major role in sort of, you see, sort of contributing to a sort of Asian sort of dialogue, discourse about its cultural root, and Buddhism will be definitely in the center of it.
I think that's a very hopeful end to this session, to see that religion and culture and young people we've discussed can all play a role in taking the next few steps. So I'd like to thank you, Wangpo, and you, Tencho, for this talk. I'd like to thank you for your attention.
And so I want to thank you all, and we hope that in not too long we can meet you again, because there are lots of plans for the rest of this year. Compassion Rising, 90th birthday. So please keep an eye on our website and on what we're doing. Thank you all.